scorching July afternoon, Karen stormed into my property, demanding I remove what she called an eyesore of a tractor. She had no idea the machine was the foundation of the governor's official 4th of July parade float. Armed with a clipboard and fake authority, Karen cited HOA rules while I silently prepared my counterattack. What she thought was a simple neighborhood spat was about to spiral into a political disaster. I stayed calm, letting her arrogance dig her own grave. Now, let me tell you how it all unfolded so you can see just how wild things got from a simple confrontation to something way bigger than anyone expected. It was the middle of a brutally hot July afternoon when the sharp screech of golf cart tires slicing across gravel shattered the thick stillness. Like a rifle shot, I lifted my welding mask just in time to see Karen, in all her furious suburban warrior glory, charging toward my property line. Like a soap opera villain who had just lost custody of her cat, she was fully loaded with what I privately called the HOA starter pack, a laminated clipboard hanging from her neck, a neon whistle dangling from her lanyard, and a fanny pack stuffed so full of papers it looked ready to explode. Before I could even set down my welding torch, she was already there at my fence, screeching at the top of her lungs about violations and standards. Her face was tomato red, and her voice was sharp enough to peel paint off a barn. She pointed her pen like a dagger at the battered tractor parked proudly in my yard, and barked out an ultimatum: you have exactly 24 hours to remove that eyesore of a tractor behind her. A couple of her usual sidekicks hovered, awkwardly sipping iced lattes and trying not to melt under the relentless sun. It would have been almost hilarious if it wasn't so jaw-droppingly stupid, because that beat-up tractor she was attacking wasn't just some forgotten rust bucket. It was the very heart of a classified state project, the skeletal frame of the governor's 4th of July parade float under construction right there in my yard. And if Karen got her way, she wouldn't just ruin my summer. She would set off a full-blown political disaster, the likes of which she couldn't even begin to imagine. I wiped my hands on a rag and strolled over to the fence, watching Karen puff herself up like a rooster ready for battle. She didn't ask, she didn't negotiate, she barked orders and waved her clipboard like it was the sword of truth, citing HOA bylaws section 7.2 about visible machinery needing to be concealed or removed to preserve the aesthetic of the neighborhood. She delivered her so-called final warning with the smug certainty of someone who believed her Facebook group comment section was legally binding. I said nothing, I just smiled, a slow, dangerous grin, letting her dig her own grave deeper with every word. She didn't know 2 months earlier the state parade committee had come to me after seeing a Christmas float I had built for the VFW. Impressed by my work, they had asked me to create the governor's new float. It would be a massive tribute to first responders, featuring a rotating firefighter sculpture, hidden lighting effects, and a fold-out stage for the governor's big finale speech. The only condition I gave was that I had to work from my property, away from nosy contractors and bureaucratic nonsense. They agreed, and for a while it had been perfect, just me, my tools, and the dream of building something epic, until Karen happened. To her, the chipped paint and worn tires of the old tractor were a blight on the neighborhood, spoiling the pristine view from her newly built yoga studio, which she had illegally erected in her backyard. But to me, that tractor was the core of the entire float. Without it, there would be no stage, no movement, and no parade finale. Karen wasn't just picking a fight with a neighbor, she was swinging a wrecking ball at the heart of the state's Independence Day celebration. I tried to throw her a lifeline once. Karen, you really don't want to mess with this, I said, as evenly as I could, but she just let out a snorting laugh fueled by years of HOA power trips, Pinterest boards, and courtroom reality TV reruns. Oh please, she sneered. Rules are rules, and your little tractor isn't special. I'll escalate this to the board, the city, the mayor, if I have to. Behind her, one of her sidekicks muttered something about being late for tennis lessons. I couldn't blame them, the heat was brutal, and Karen's bad energy was practically radioactive. I glanced back at the tractor, glinting stubbornly in the sun, early structures already welded to its frame, gleaming aluminum towers, a heavy-duty battery pack for the upcoming light show, and the custom hydraulic lifts that would unfold the tribute sculptures. It was delicate and complex, and if she tried moving it without the proper handling, she could collapse the whole rig beyond repair. Karen wasn't just being a nuisance, she was risking the entire parade. Karen slapped a hot pink violation sticker on my gate like she was handing down the word of God, then whirled around and stormed off to her golf cart, kicking up a cloud of dust behind her, yelling over her shoulder, 24 hours, then enforcement begins as she revved the tiny engine like she was charging into battle. I stood there, heart pounding, but not with fear, with sharp electric anticipation. She had no clue what she had just triggered. She thought she was winning some petty little HOA spat. But she was poking a bear that had the full weight of the state government behind it, and best of all, every single move she made from now on would be caught crystal clear on my security cameras, documented, timestamped, and neatly forwarded to the state attorney's office. That night, as I double-checked the locks and fired up the floodlights across the yard, I found myself smiling wide, not worried, not even a little, because while Karen thought she was writing my eviction notice, she was actually writing her own ticket to the biggest public humiliation this neighborhood, maybe even the entire state, had ever seen. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had backed up all the camera feeds, filed a quiet alert with parade security, and left a neat sealed letter from the governor's legal team right by the front gate, affirming that any tampering with my project would be considered felony interference with a state-sponsored operation. I didn't even bother knocking on her door. Tomorrow Karen would come looking for a fight, and tomorrow she was going to find out just how badly she had screwed up. By the time the sun started to crawl over the hills the next morning, the thick, heavy air already warned me that today was going to be a scorcher, and not just from the heat. I had barely stepped out of the barn when my gut twisted into a knot. Something was wrong. Even before I spotted it, the entire yard felt different, like a violation had seeped into the ground itself. And there it was. My heart sank straight into my boots when I laid eyes on the damage. The tractor had been attacked, not by the hands of nature or accident, but by deliberate, petty sabotage. Deep gouges had been scratched across the paint, ugly jagged scars that cut right through the metal skin. Someone had smeared wet mud all over the panels like a child throwing a tantrum in a sandbox. Garbage was crammed into the engine compartment, soda cans, crumpled wrappers, a half-eaten sandwich. And slapped across the windshield like a bright neon slap in the face was a sticker screaming removal pending HOA enforcement, in letters so big and obnoxious you could see them from the next block. It was amateur sabotage, sure, but it was enough to cause serious delays. Enough to jeopardize the float construction timeline we were already racing against. Enough to cost real consequences far beyond a neighborhood squabble. I clenched my fists at my sides, breathing hard through my nose, fighting the urge to rip that sticker off and march straight down the street to Karen's front door. Instead, I spun on my heel and headed back into the barn, every step ringing with rage I barely kept contained. I powered up the security system, scrolled through the overnight footage, and there it was, clearer than high noon. Karen, illuminated by the blinding floodlights, creeping across my property like a raccoon on a midnight raid. She wasn't alone. Two of her loyal lapdogs followed close behind, looking like nervous teenagers caught toilet papering a house. Karen stomped straight up to the tractor, fists clenched, her face twisted into a mask of self-righteous fury. She slapped the violation sticker onto the windshield so violently that it almost tore in two, then grabbed handfuls of dirt and threw it at the tires like she was performing some kind of HOA exorcism ritual. I watched the footage 3 times just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Then I saved it onto 3 separate USB drives, emailed it to myself, and backed it up on the cloud just for good measure. Karen had crossed a line she could never uncross. She hadn't just been annoying anymore. She had officially committed criminal vandalism against state property. And the best part was she didn't even realize it. Not yet. She still thought she was the righteous crusader, cleaning up the neighborhood one ugly tractor at a time. She had no idea she was about to be the star of a criminal investigation that would rock this entire town. I wasted no time. I picked up my phone and called Mike from the state parade security team. Mike answered before the first ring even finished. I could hear the tension in his voice as he listened to my report. I sent over the footage while we were still on the line. By the time we hung up, Mike was already rallying a team to start documenting everything. No direct confrontation yet, he said, but if Karen so much as sneezed in my direction again, they would drop the full weight of the law on her like an anvil. I also called up Dale, an old buddy of mine, a retired sheriff who now volunteered on the parade security committee. When I told him what happened, Dale laughed so hard I thought he was going to keel over, but he promised he'd be nearby, ready to step in if things got even uglier. And with Karen involved, that was practically guaranteed. Meanwhile, Karen was busy broadcasting her own downfall to the world. That afternoon, she fired off an email blast to the entire HOA community mailing list, proudly declaring that she had neutralized a major threat to property values and restored neighborhood aesthetics. She attached pictures of the vandalized tractor like war trophies, each one more damning than the last. The tone of the email was pure smugness soaked in a level of delusion so thick it could have been bottled and sold at a homeowners association conference. She didn't realize she wasn't just bragging. She was confessing, in writing, to an entire neighborhood of witnesses. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. Word spread like wildfire. A sweet retired couple 3 houses down, the Ellisons, forwarded me the email with a quick note: heads up, Karen is blowing up Facebook too. Sure enough, when I logged in, Karen's page was plastered with post after post celebrating her so-called victory. Selfies next to the damaged tractor, boasting captions about standing up for the community, pictures of the pink sticker, and even a boomerang video of her tossing dirt onto the tires like some kind of pioneer woman defending the homestead. I spent an hour screenshotting everything, cataloging every comment and reply, building a digital case file thicker than the Sunday paper. Late that evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the cicadas droned in the sticky summer air, I heard the rattle of gravel at the front gate. Tony, the HOA president, stood there looking like he had aged a decade in the past 24 hours. His shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. I could tell from a mile away that he had not signed off on Karen's little solo mission. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a landslide, about to take him under. I crossed my arms and leaned against the fence post, waiting. Tony shuffled awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Look, man," he started, voice low and shaky. "We had no idea she was doing any of this. The board doesn't authorize vandalism. This isn't us. We're going to handle it internally." His words tumbled out in a rush, like he hoped if he talked fast enough he could escape the situation. I almost felt bad for him, stuck between loyalty to the HOA and the cold reality that Karen had just detonated a bomb in their backyard. But I couldn't afford sympathy. "Not now. Tony," I said, my voice cold and steady. "This isn't just a neighborhood disagreement anymore. That tractor is classified as a state project property. What she did, what you all enabled whether you meant to or not, is a felony. I have security footage, eyewitnesses, physical damage, and now a paper trail thanks to her little social media parade. This is way beyond HOA politics now." His face went even paler, if that was possible. He mumbled something about trying to de-escalate and practically sprinted back down the street. I watched him disappear into the gathering dusk, then locked the gate behind me. There was no time to waste feeling angry. I grabbed my tools and rolled up my sleeves. Every scratch, every dent, every act of petty destruction Karen had gleefully unleashed had to be repaired before parade day, or everything we had worked for would be lost. As the stars came out and the crickets took over the night shift, I scrubbed mud from the tires, peeled away the sticker without tearing the paint, welded patches over the gouges, and rewired the light mounts. Every clang of the hammer, every hiss of the torch fueled my determination. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, thought she could use her clipboard and Facebook posts to tear down months of hard work. Instead, all she had done was ignite something bigger, something stronger, something she had no power to stop. By the time I finally stepped back, wiped sweat from my forehead, and surveyed the patched-up frame under the harsh glow of the barn lights, I knew one thing for sure. The fight was just getting started and Karen was already hopelessly out of her league. The morning heat was already rising in shimmering waves off the pavement when I heard the rumble that sent a chill crawling up my spine. It wasn't a neighbor's pickup or the roar of kids' bikes tearing up the sidewalk. No, this was a mechanical growl, ugly and urgent, like trouble coming on 4 bald tires. I wiped the grease from my hands and leaned out the barn door just in time to see a battered tow truck clunking its way down the street toward my property. Quick and easy towing was sloppily spray-painted across the side, the kind of hack job logo that screamed fly-by-night operation. Behind the tow truck, like a queen surveying her battlefield from atop a motorized throne, sat Karen in her golf cart, dressed for battle in a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, clutching her clipboard like a knight with a shield. Her posture screamed victory. Her grin was so wide it could have swallowed the sun whole. Around her, curious neighbors peered out from porches and behind curtains, some already pulling out their phones to catch whatever disaster was about to unfold on camera. I leaned casually against the side of the tractor, arms crossed, heart pounding not with fear, but with a kind of grim satisfaction. Karen had made her move, and she had chosen poorly. The tow truck driver, a lanky, sunburned man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, climbed out and stared at the tractor like he had just been asked to tow the Statue of Liberty. His eyes darted from the massive float structure welded onto the tractor's frame to his dinky truck, and then back again, as if hoping he had misread the situation. Karen stomped over to him, jabbing her finger at the tractor, barking orders about violations and HOA citations and immediate removal. The driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and looked at me for confirmation. I simply smiled and said nothing. Let them make the first move. Let them dig their own graves. The driver shuffled reluctantly back to his truck, pulling out a rusted chain that looked older than my grandfather's tool chest. He tried to wrap it around one of the tractor's massive axles, struggling and sweating under the brutal July sun. The second he attempted to crank the winch, it became clear just how colossal a mistake this was. The tow truck's front wheels lifted clean off the ground, wobbling in the air for a horrifying second before slamming back down with a crunch. The neighbors burst into laughter, some openly pointing and shaking their heads. Karen's face turned from victorious smugness to red-faced confusion and rage. She stormed over to the driver, screaming at him to do it properly, to stop being lazy, to remove that monstrosity immediately. The poor guy tried again, repositioning the truck, revving the engine until it howled, but it was no use. The tractor and the heavy-duty float frame were far too much for his pathetic equipment. The winch whined, the chain groaned, and the tires kicked up clouds of dust, but nothing moved. Worse, the heavy vibrations from the truck's desperate attempts sent shudders through the float structure, causing one of the welded support bars to groan dangerously under the strain. That was enough for me. I straightened up, stepped forward, and in a voice loud enough for the gathering crowd and especially the recording cell phones to hear, I called out that if he touched that float again, he would be personally liable for any damage to state property. The driver froze mid-crank, panic flashing across his face. Karen whirled toward me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. State property, she squawked, her voice cracking. This rust bucket, you have the nerve to call it state property. Her laugh was a wild, unhinged sound that only grew louder when a news van from the local station, tipped off by someone from the parade committee, rolled up onto the street. Reporters jumped out, cameras already rolling, microphones thrust forward like spears aimed straight at the unfolding chaos. Karen, mistaking the attention for an opportunity to seize more imaginary power, flounced over to the reporters, launching into a high-pitched, breathless monologue about community values, safety standards, and her heroic crusade against ugly eyesores. She gestured wildly at the tractor like it was a ticking time bomb she had single-handedly defused. The reporters, to their credit, kept their faces neutral, cameras rolling, microphones capturing every glorious misstep. They zoomed in on the float structure, the polished welds, the custom hydraulic lifts, the intricate framework that no amateur in their right mind would mistake for junk. And then the real showstopper arrived. A motorcade of black SUVs with government plates rolled down the street like a thundercloud on wheels, parting the growing crowd effortlessly. Doors swung open with practiced precision, and out stepped Governor Warren himself, flanked by aides and security. He cut through the chaos like a hot knife through butter, his sunglasses flashing in the sun, his expression unreadable. Karen's monologue faltered mid-sentence as she caught sight of him, her face draining of color faster than a popped balloon. The governor did not waste time. He walked straight up to me, shook my hand firmly, thanked me for my work on the float, and spoke loudly enough for every camera, every microphone, every gawking neighbor to hear. "Heard you had some challenges," he said, his tone measured. Karen stumbled forward, desperate to salvage the narrative, plastering a shaky smile across her face. "Governor Warren, sir, I was just protecting the community. This man had an abandoned machine ruining our property values. I had to act." The governor turned to her slowly, removing his sunglasses with the kind of deliberate precision that made even the birds in the trees seem to hush. "You took action," he repeated in a voice so cold it could have flash frozen the whole block. He swept his gaze over the damaged float, the battered tow truck, the ruined support beams. "You vandalized a classified state project under active construction for a government event." Karen blinked rapidly, stammering something about bylaws and neighborhood pride. The governor nodded slightly and gestured toward the sheriff standing nearby, who stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs. "This is a violation of multiple state and federal statutes," the sheriff said, voice calm and professional. "You are under arrest for vandalism, trespassing, and obstruction of state operations." The cameras captured every glorious second as Karen shrieked, protested, begged, and ultimately collapsed into incoherent sobbing while she was cuffed and led away like a cautionary tale in human form. The tow truck driver, sensing the storm was about to swallow him too, quietly unhooked the chain and peeled away from the scene before anyone could even think about asking questions. The reporters swarmed the governor, peppering him with questions while the crowd buzzed like a hive of stunned bees. I quietly stepped back toward the float, inspecting the damage. Scratched but reparable. Bent but not broken. We could fix it. We would fix it. Governor Warren gave a brief but powerful statement to the cameras, praising the importance of community builders, warning about the dangers of unauthorized interference with civic projects, and subtly but unmistakably demolishing any remaining scrap of Karen's credibility. In the distance, I spotted Tony, the hapless HOA president, slinking away down the sidewalk like a man trying to crawl out of the blast zone of a bomb he never saw coming. The sun beat down relentlessly, but somehow it felt lighter now, like a storm had passed and left only clarity in its wake. Karen was gone, her reign of passive-aggressive terror finally over, and the parade, the float, the community itself would survive. No, not just survive, thrive stronger than ever because of everything she had failed to destroy. The day after Karen's dramatic downfall, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked beehive. Whispers floated across fences, gathered on sidewalks, curled through open windows. People who once crossed the street to avoid her golf cart now leaned in eagerly to swap stories, compare videos, and laugh until tears rolled down their cheeks. Clips of Karen being handcuffed played in endless loops online, stitched into memes, set to circus music, and racked up thousands of shares. You could not open Facebook without seeing her frozen face, mid-sobs splashed across your feed. Local news vans still prowled the streets like sharks drawn by blood in the water, and the once quiet corners of our little subdivision now felt like a film set caught between tragedy and farce. Meanwhile, I had no time to savor the spectacle. The parade clock was still ticking, faster and louder with every passing minute. The float needed to be ready, not just patched but pristine, if we wanted to avoid letting the governor and the entire state down. I spent the early morning methodically inspecting every inch of the float, crawling under it, tapping welds, running my hands over the panels to feel for hidden stress fractures. The structural frame, Think every lucky star in the sky had held strong. No catastrophic failures, no twisted beams. But the cosmetic damage was another story altogether. The paint was scratched deeply in multiple places, some of the trim had been bent out of alignment, and the decorative elements were scuffed and dirty. It would take hours, maybe days, of painstaking work to make it parade-ready again. And the clock wasn't slowing down for anyone. I rolled up my sleeves, tied a rag around my neck to soak up the sweat already pouring down my back, and got to it. Wrenches clanked, metal groaned, and paintbrushes whipped through the humid air. Alone at first, I attacked the work with grim determination, refusing to let Karen's pathetic sabotage be the end of this dream. But around noon, just as the sun reached its peak and the heat grew thick enough to chew, I heard it. A knock at the front gate, firm but not angry. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped outside, half expecting another reporter or maybe another HOA disaster. Instead, what I saw froze me in my tracks and cracked something warm and surprising open inside my chest. There stood a group of neighbors, real ones, not clipboard-waving busybodies. They looked awkward but determined, clutching toolboxes, paint cans, homemade sandwiches, and coolers sweating ice-cold lemonade. At their head was Mr. Ellery, the retired Air Force colonel from 2 streets over, standing ramrod straight despite the heat, a set of wrenches slung over his shoulder like a rifle. "We heard you might need a hand," he said simply, nodding toward the battered float behind me. For a second, all I could do was blink. These were the same people who had once tiptoed around Karen, terrified of fines and letters and whispered threats. And now they were here, offering to get their hands dirty, to work, to fight, side by side with me. I found my voice, grinned so hard my face hurt, and said, "Only if you are ready to sweat for it." They smiled back, some sheepishly, some fiercely, and we got to work. The next hours blurred into a glorious, chaotic symphony. Kids painted new touch-up coats under the watchful eyes of their grandmothers wielding paintbrushes like seasoned warriors. Retired mechanics tuned the wiring, tested the battery systems, checked every bolt and bracket. Younger guys rigged extra security lights along the trailer frame, triple-checking the hitch connections. Even Mrs. Pearson, who once filed a noise complaint against my rooster, showed up with a tray of cookies and a jug of sweet tea, offering lunch runs and moral support with a shy, embarrassed smile. Sweat poured, muscles ached, and laughter bubbled up constantly, cutting through the sticky heat like a fresh breeze. It felt like a barn raising straight out of an old American painting, neighbors rallying not just around a project, but around each other. While we worked, news about Karen trickled in like delicious drops of rain on a desert afternoon. She was facing official charges: vandalism of state property, criminal trespassing, obstruction of a government event. There were rumors swirling that the HOA board had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to suspend her indefinitely pending a full investigation. Some said the entire board might be under scrutiny for letting her run wild for so long. I could not help but smile every time I caught snippets of conversation floating across the worksite about the great fall of Queen Karen. Late that afternoon, just as we hammered the last of the replacement panels into place and stepped back to admire the gleaming new finish, a convoy of trucks rolled up from the main road. Mike from the State Parade Committee hopped down from the lead truck, grinning like a kid at Christmas. "Word got around you could use a little backup," he said, clapping me on the back so hard I nearly staggered. Behind him, an army of technicians, carpenters, electricians, and welders poured out, unloading spare materials and specialized tools. The energy exploded. The state team jumped right in alongside the neighbors, reinforcing the hydraulic lifts, upgrading the lighting rigs, adding extra structural supports. The float didn't just get repaired. It evolved. New features were added, safer and flashier than before. The custom light show was reprogrammed to sync perfectly with patriotic music. The rotating firefighter sculpture was polished until it gleamed under the setting sun, and a fresh coat of fire engine red and deep navy blue made the whole platform look brand new. But the best surprise of all came when Mike pulled me aside, handed me a thick manila envelope, and winked. The governor's idea, he said with a smirk. Inside was a letter authorizing the creation of a second float for the end of the parade, one dedicated not just to first responders, but to the spirit of true community resilience. A subtle but unmistakable jab at Karen's reign of HOA terror. My jaw dropped as I read the details. They wanted a neighborhood heroes float, something playful, something joyful, something that celebrated neighbors helping neighbors and mocked the forces that tried to divide us. I got to work immediately, sketching plans on the back of scrap wood and old blueprints. The vision came together fast, a cartoonishly oversized HOA clipboard crushed under the boots of volunteers, colorful banners flying high with slogans like community over control and real neighbors build not break. The state engineers threw themselves into it with gusto, rigging hidden speakers that would blast upbeat, playful music. Kids helped paint the banners with wild splashes of color, laughing and arguing over what slogans were funniest. By the time the stars came out and the security floodlights buzzed to life over the worksite, the second float was well on its way to completion. As I stood there under the vast, humid night sky, watching families and friends labor side by side under the blinking stars, I felt something shift deep inside me. Karen had tried to tear us apart. She had tried to impose fear and control, to dominate through pettiness and threats. Instead, she had forged something stronger than she could ever comprehend. She had united us. She had reminded everyone that real communities are not built on fear. They are built on sweat, on laughter, on hard days and late nights, and a willingness to get dirty for something bigger than yourself. By the time we finally packed up for the night, both floats gleamed under the floodlights like beacons, ready to roll into parade day not just as symbols of celebration, but as living proof that no amount of arrogance could ever outshine real unity. Tomorrow we would show the whole state what true community pride looked like, and Karen would be nothing more than a footnote, a cautionary tale swallowed by the roar of real neighbors standing tall. The morning of the parade arrived dressed in perfection. The sky stretched out in a bright, endless blue, so crisp it looked unreal. From the second I opened the barn doors, I knew today would be something more than just a celebration. Crowds had already begun to gather along the main road, setting up lawn chairs, stringing up banners, waving small flags that flashed red, white, and blue in the morning sun. News vans lined the intersections like steel beasts, their satellite dishes reaching skyward. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, prepping their cameras and adjusting their microphones while drones buzzed overhead like curious bees. Both floats sat gleaming and ready, the tribute float shining with polished steel and patriotic colors, and the neighborhood heroes float parked proudly behind it, the giant broken HOA clipboard gleaming like a badge of honor. As the final checks were made and volunteers bustled around tightening bolts and taping down banners, Governor Warren arrived in a crisp navy suit that somehow seemed immune to the oppressive July heat. He moved through the crowd with the easy authority of a man who knew how to lead without needing to shout. When he reached me, he gripped my hand firmly and thanked me again in front of the assembled volunteers and workers. His voice, broadcast live from portable speakers, carried clear and strong as he spoke about resilience, about real community spirit, about standing against fear and selfishness. I saw more than one neighbor wipe away a tear, and even the seasoned news crews looked visibly moved. When he finished, he turned to me with a quick nod and said time to show them what real pride looks like. I climbed up onto the operator seat, just behind the tribute float's main sculpture, fired up the engine, and felt the familiar rumble under my boots. When the parade marshal signaled, I pulled forward and the float began to roll down Main Street to the deafening roar of applause. The energy in the air was electric, thick enough to touch. Families waved flags, kids perched on their parents' shoulders hollered with delight, and old veterans stood at attention and saluted as the tribute float rolled past. The massive rotating statue of a firefighter gleamed under the morning sun, slowly turning as the hydraulics unfolded flawlessly. The synchronized lights danced along the frame, and patriotic music soared from the speakers, blending with the cheers of the crowd into a single, beautiful symphony of pride. Riding just behind me in the governor's convertible were local heroes, firefighters, police officers, nurses, teachers, real people who had kept the community running through storm and fire and every hardship in between. As we passed the reviewing stand packed with officials, veterans, and dignitaries, I caught sight of some wiping away tears, others standing in silent, heartfelt salute. It was no longer just a parade. It was a living testament to who we were and what we stood for. And then, just as the tribute float rounded the next bend, the neighborhood heroes float rolled into view, and the crowd erupted into a whole different kind of celebration. Laughter and cheers spilled down the street like a flood. People pointed and shouted with glee as they caught sight of the giant broken clipboard crushed underfoot, the colorful banners reading slogans like "Community over Control" and "Neighbors not Dictators." Kids riding the float tossed candy into the crowds, waving madly while the speakers pumped upbeat, playful music that made even the most stoic old-timers tap their feet. From my seat, I scanned the crowd and spotted her tucked away behind a news van, wearing oversized sunglasses and a floppy hat pulled low. Karen, trying desperately to hide in plain sight. But it was too late. Whispers turned into gasps, gasps into chuckles, chuckles into full-blown laughter. Someone pointed directly at her and a ripple of giggles ran through the crowd. Phones snapped pictures. Camera crews pivoted. She shrank in on herself, trying to disappear, but there was nowhere to run. She had become a living cautionary tale, immortalized not by fear but by ridicule. The governor, standing tall in his convertible, pretended not to notice her, waving broadly to the cheering crowd. It was a masterclass in grace. The floats rolled on, bands marched past, kids tossed candy, dogs barked happily, and Karen stood there getting smaller and smaller until finally she slunk away, swallowed by the very community she had once tried to control. As the final notes of music echoed down the street and the last floats rounded the corner toward the closing ceremony at the park, I parked the tractor and climbed down, feeling a tidal wave of exhaustion and pride crash over me. Families flooded the area, snapping pictures with the floats, hugging volunteers, sharing lemonade and stories about the day Karen tried and failed to break us. I lost count of how many strangers shook my hand, slapped my back, or simply said thank you with tears in their eyes. Later that afternoon, under the shade of a giant oak in the town park, the governor stood on the main stage and made it official. Our neighborhood was awarded the first ever Community Spirit Award, a new tradition born from this crazy, beautiful mess. He unveiled a bronze plaque that would be installed permanently in the town square, commemorating the people who stood up when it mattered most. When my name was called to come up and accept a certificate on behalf of everyone who had worked so hard, the crowd erupted in cheers so loud they drowned out even the fireworks that began popping overhead. Standing there on that stage, looking out over a sea of faces shining with hope and pride and something stronger, something unbreakable, I realized we had built something bigger than any float, bigger than any parade. We had rebuilt our community, brick by brick, laugh by laugh, hand by hand. Karen's clipboard had not just cracked under our boots, it had shattered. And from the pieces we had built something real, something lasting. As the sun dipped low and the fireworks burst into 1,000 brilliant colors above us, I found myself back by the floats, watching kids chase each other with sparklers, old neighbors laughing together like old friends, and new bonds being forged over melted popsicles and folding chairs. Somewhere in the distance, Karen's house sat dark and silent, a forgotten relic of a reign no one missed. And I knew with a certainty that filled my chest that this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. A beginning louder, stronger, prouder than anything she could have ever imagined. And when the biggest firework exploded directly overhead, painting the sky in red, white, and blue fire, I leaned back against the tractor, smiled into the warm night air, and thought this is what a real community looks like. This is what real victory feels like.